I'm Grant Walker. Welcome to Last Call for Wednesday the 1st of July. I'll be back with Heads Up Thursday, 10 a.m. Back to Greece. It's now confirmed. After months of negotiations and rejected deals, Greece has finally defaulted on its $1.6 billion IMF loan. The default means the IMF will no longer provide Greece with aid packages, which has been relying on to pay public sector wages and pensions, and will lose access to the more than $16 billion in financial support it has not yet used. An IMF spokesperson confirmed a payment from Greece had not been received. They said, "We have informed our executive board that Greece is now in arrears and can only receive IMF financing once the arrears are cleared." But he says the IMF did receive a request from the Greek authorities for an extension of Greece's repayment obligation. This request will go to the IMF's executive board in due course. This comes after a desperate last-minute scramble by the Greek government to negotiate further financial aid. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras asked his European partners for a 2-year aid package to cover its financial needs. Finance ministers in Europe will meet on Wednesday to confer over Mr. Tsipras' latest loan request. But German Chancellor Angela Merkel has ruled out any more negotiations with Mr. Tsipras unless he calls off a referendum on Sunday. That's Monday, New Zealand time. The Greek people will be asked on Sunday if the embattled nation should adopt the austerity measures demanded by creditors to receive more aid. But they seem to be split on this issue. Thousands have gathered on the streets of Athens voicing their opinions. There are two different rallies, one supporting the government's rejection of the proposed austerity measures and the other calling for them to be adopted so Greece can remain in the Eurozone. Meanwhile, banks are still closed across Greece and withdrawal limits are still in place at ATMs. Let's talk green men. An ad campaign from Auckland Transport seeking to raise awareness about crossing roads safely has been labelled as creepy and patronising by a transport commentator. The Green Man campaign features outdoor advertising of pedestrians walking beside a green figure, as well as real-life interactive men in morph suits helping pedestrians cross Auckland's busy central streets. Auckland Transport created the campaign with the assistance from the New Zealand Transport Agency and the ad agency Work Communications. The council-controlled organisation says there were 50 fatal and serious pedestrian crashes in the Auckland CBD from 2009 to 13, 9 of which were on Queen Street or Karangahape Road. The campaign hit the streets this week and will run until the end of July and has a media spend of $76,500. Auckland Transport blog editor Matt Lowry told NBR Radio the campaign is stupid and places too much responsibility on pedestrians and not enough on drivers. He says it's not like people don't already know how to cross the road. Auckland Transport, he says, needs to have a look at why people are jaywalking, and we need to be building our streets to accommodate that rather than force everyone to cross at a signalled crossing. Queen Street has enough pedestrian crossings, he says, but many other streets don't, and people can be waiting for several minutes. The transport commentator says he's not at all impressed by the creepy morph suit men who ask people if they want help crossing the road. An Auckland Transport spokesman says a survey of Queen Street found 2,250 people crossed the road away from the lights in just 1 hour, placing themselves at a higher risk of injury or death. The spokesman says observational surveys during the same hour also recorded pedestrians running out from behind parked cars into the street without looking, people dodging through moving traffic, walking out partway onto the road only to have to turn around and return to the curb, and other dangerous behaviour. He says the campaign's success will be measured by on-site research on Queen Street and K Road, as well as a focus panel. Auckland Transport says the total social cost of motor vehicle injury crashes in 2013, which includes injuries recorded by the police, hospitals and ACC, was estimated at approximately $3.14 billion at June 2014 prices.
NBR Radio, Wednesday the 1st of July. I'm Andrew Patterson and with me Chris Keel. Chris, the Commerce Commission tomorrow will release its final draft determination on the price Chorus can charge for its wholesale broadband services. What are we looking for?
Well, in December the Commerce Commission released a draft decision which whacked $6.50 off the price per month that everyone has to pay for their copper line. And that potentially has a huge impact on Chorus. Extrapolating it out, this is why Chorus said it would have a $1 billion hole in its earnings up to 2019. So there's big stakes.
And effectively, this really is about the nature of the price. There's quite a gap between what Chorus wants to be charging and what the ISPs want them to be charged. What's the fine line the Commerce Commission is having to tread here?
Yeah, the ISPs were going right back to the Commerce Commission's very original decision, which was to lop $10 off the price, and they went right ahead and reduced their prices one after the other, and Spark even put it into its forecasts, which it's now had to step back from. Whereas Chorus, of course, is trying to keep the price up. It argues that it needs money to build out the UFB, and it also says that if we make copper too cheap, that's going to retard UFB uptake, which is, of course, already quite sluggish.
What do you think? Where do you think they're likely to hug? The centre line, perhaps?
It's just taken so many twists and turns. You'd have to be a fool to take a rock solid guess. We have had a couple of analysts who we quote on NBR's website today. One reckons within a dollar either side, and another reckons probably around $37. So the pick is that the Commerce Commission will pretty much stay with its draft price it released in December, but there's still the big decision too of whether it will backdate the change, whether it will be backdated till December last year or December 2012. And when you extrapolate that over 1.5 million or so copper lines, that's a lot of money. Chorus could be in for about $180 million windfall, or on the other hand, the ISPs could have some extra money in their pockets.
Was this envisaged when the legislation was formed around Chorus? It seems to be playing out in a way that perhaps wasn't originally intended.
Well, the coalition who were behind the copper tax campaign, which included Consumer and Internet NZ and TUANZ, they argued that when the Telecommunications Act was changed in 2011, it signalled a move from retail minus to cost plus pricing. In basic terms, that means cost plus pricing means basing the price on actual costs and then a reasonable margin, rather than just thinking up a number and then taking a bit off. Chorus has disputed that, and the legislation has just been quite open to wide interpretation. So there's been a lot of trench warfare.
Whatever the decision tomorrow, we know there's probably going to be more action to follow. It won't be a final decision.
There is the final decision, if it is due at an unnamed date in December. But then Amy Adams has asked MB to undertake a sweeping review of the entire Telecommunications Act, so everything's on the table again, and we'll be looking to see what the lay of the land will be after the UFB rollout is complete, and whether Chorus finally gets a free hand or if it gets its hands bound even tighter.
So Chorus shareholders might be in for a nervous wait over the next 24 hours.
Indeed, but there's also the bizarre situation that the largest shareholder is the government, which now owns 25% of Chorus. It's been gradually putting in money as part of its contribution to the public-private UFB, so it's in the very unusual situation of being both shareholder and sheriff.
Which creates perhaps some conflict issues in the end, long term.
I think definitely some of the ISPs see it that way,
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us, Chris Keel, with us on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio with Hotel de Brett, partying since 1959. www.hoteldebret.com. NBR Radio.
NBR Radio on Wednesday, the 1st of July. I'm Andrew Patterson. With me, Nathan Smith, for our weekly Foreign Affairs wrap. Nathan, let's start off with Tunisia and France. Obviously, serious developments in the last week or two. Where does this leave the country particularly, and I guess that there's the continued weakness that obviously follows as a result of recent events?
Yeah, look, Tunisia's post-2011 with the Arab Spring is probably, of those countries that were involved in that particular uprising, is probably the best example. Its geography allows it to have quite a homogenous polity all the way through. There's not a lot of obstacles, not a lot of geographical boundaries and things that split a population up. So it's actually very difficult for a group like ISIS or the jihadists to make a dent in that particular polity. But the government is too weak to deal with the jihadists that, by the way, have been attacking almost weekly in some of the larger cities in Tunisia, including Tunis. This isn't the only one that has happened. It has been happening for a long time, and there is a boiling insurgency, especially around the Algerian border, that seems to infiltrate into Tunisia proper. But the country itself and the legislative bodies, they've had a lot of elections since 2011, and they're quite a robust government. They're not likely to be hurt by this, and so you're not likely to see it becoming a security vacuum in which ISIS can move into, as they have in Libya or in Syria. That having been said, they are heavily reliant on tourism. They made a lot of money last year, and there's about 200,000 jobs just dedicated in Tunis to the tourism sector. And a lot of people have been leaving over the past couple of days, and they're unlikely to come back because they will tarnish Tunisia with the brush of North Africa. And unfortunately, that's not fair, but it is what we saw over the weekend, nevertheless. To me, if you step back from that and have a look at what ISIS did, because they did claim the attacks, they also claimed the attacks in France. It's important to have a look as to exactly why they chose to do things like this. To me, it doesn't show strength of the jihadist movement, especially ISIS. It shows their weakness. They were not able to dispatch their own militants from the Syria-Iraq battle space to do what happened in France and Tunisia. They required or relied on grassroots and lone wolves or small franchise cells to do this. And they've been encouraging people to take up arms, an assault rifle or a small hand grenade anywhere in the world. That doesn't show strength to me. In fact, ISIS has not been able to conduct a transnational attack at all yet. So this is all in the larger context of Ramadan as well, which ISIS and other al-Qaeda groups have said would be an uptick in violence. So expect what was going on. But ultimately, I think the takeaway of this is that Tunisia and France are not going to fall as governments or polities because of these sorts of attacks. They're not existential threats. Yes, they kill people and they're tragic, but there are real ramifications of this. And essentially these are easy to accomplish attacks, and they're a lesson for everybody, all security services around the world, really.
All right. Let's talk about Iran, because obviously the nuclear deadline, the final agreement perhaps is only part of the problem. Where does this leave Iran now, particularly vis-a-vis its position in the international community?
They're still wishing to be taken seriously. Of course. That's actually one of the big reasons why they're doing what they're doing with the nuclear program. It's long been suspected that they don't necessarily want a nuclear weapon. That would invite a lot of angst and malice from across the world, potentially even an attack to remove that weapon. All they want is a nuclear program. And the longer that program lasts, the longer the negotiations carry on, the more likely they are to be talking to the P5+1, which is the 5 permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany, and the more they're taken seriously as a nation. So this is important for them on a long-term strategic level. But look, the deadline for this was supposed to be today, but it's been extended through to July 7. And that indicates that there's still a lot of talk to go on here. There's been some worry in the States that maybe Senator John Kerry, who ran for president in 2004 for the Democrats, was potentially giving up too much in this, and that whatever deal comes out of this, the Americans have said that they will walk away from. But it appears that, no deal is better than a bad deal used to be what they say, but it really does appear now that any deal is better than no deal, and that's not a good place to be in when you're negotiating. Obama's giving this a lot of cachet. It seems to be for want of a better word, the lodestar of his administration. He wants to get this sorted out. And there's a lot of analytical worry that they may be, the Americans and the P5+1 may be giving too much on this. The Americans have changed their stance. They're not as strong as they used to be, certainly not as strong or as forceful as France is in this. And they may be getting themselves into a point where the deal might be useful, but what happens afterwards, that's the real crucial one. Can Iran allow inspections? Does Iran want to enrich uranium? Will it enrich uranium? What's the breakout time for a nuclear weapon? Is it likely to be at some of these reactors or hidden ones that we don't even know about? Is it going to be subject and policing with this document or not? That's the real question. And from information from the Supreme Leader the other day saying that he doesn't really care what's in the document, they're still going to go for the nuclear weapons, or still going to have a nuclear program. There's some rhetoric back home in Iran which makes you suspect that a lot of this could just be rhetoric. And are they really serious? That's the central question.
Because one of the interesting points is the inspections are not actually guaranteed.
No, they're not. And actually, the judicial body passed the legislation in a couple of weeks ago in Iran, saying that they are very sceptical of the IAEA and might not actually let them into some of these places. So on one side, the negotiators saying, "Look, here's what you need to do. This is what we'll try to do." But back at home in Iran, very different languages coming out, and it seems to me that Iran might have the upper hand in this negotiation process. Although it's very hard to see behind these doors.
Finally, let's talk about Greece. Greece is the word at the moment, obviously dominating headlines over the last 72 hours. Greece is in an extremely difficult position, as we know, and it's almost a damned if it does and damned if it doesn't type scenario. How much do you believe that the government really that's left now is almost a puppet government, whichever way that falls, subject to the control of Greece is effectively subject to the control of its creditors? Yeah, the creditors are in control. That is the central point. They went into these negotiations from the Greeks' perspective, expecting to budge the creditors a little bit, the IMF, the ECB, but they've been very strong on that. They want to get their money back. They want to make sure that the system continues to function, which it won't if Greece defaults. And they have this concept that Greece potentially needs to be taught a lesson because you have a lot of other countries, Spain, Italy, Portugal, and Ireland. They're all thinking about the same things. But look, the creditors are in control. The bailout terms are, so far as we have seen, unacceptable to this particular Greek government. But look, they'll have to be acceptable to some sort of Greek government, and that's the underlying point here, is that there is really only one option for the Greeks, and that is to rearrange their financial system, rearrange their government in a way that suits the creditors, in a way that suits the rest of the European Union. A lot of those currently are red lines for the Syriza government, and they won't be willing to trespass them. But that doesn't mean someone coming in later on won't. And that decision needs to be made one way or the other. And whether or not this referendum on the bailout terms that the Greek Prime Minister set for Sunday goes for a yes or a no vote, his government is still under threat from the internal people. There's a lot of people want to stay in the Eurozone, but a lot of people also don't want the austerity. But something's going to have to give. And there's only one route for this. So if it's not his government, it might be someone else's. Is the equivalent of the creditors putting it in an administrator type situation? Well, similar to Italy. I think that could be on the cards. Look, it's not going to be an easy move for Greece, and the rest of Europe is watching very closely. In fact, the Podemos party in Spain sent a letter to the Greek Prime Minister saying that they're very happy that he's going for the referendum to bring in the people and get their side of the story. Because, look, ultimately, if Greece can get away with this, why couldn't Spain get away with it? Portugal or any of the others. And the house of cards comes down. Yeah. So clearly that's why we are seeing the Troika remain as resolute as they are, because they know that dissension is going to create serious problems for them down the track as well too. The EU is bigger than Greece. It's bigger than any one country. And there are forces involved in this that really. The problem is that when they started out with the EU, there was not supposed to be any route to escape. You were in forever. But this is a question no one really expected to ask at this point, and it's just gotten to a point where the forces, the centrifugal forces around the political spectrum are now merging with the economic forces and the social forces, and those are all very different aspects, all interplaying with each other. And it's not just Greece.
There's a bunch of other countries, and there's a lot of different reasons for a lot of animosity with the European project at the moment. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and if it's not this, once this is finished, it'll be something else. Look at the Shenzhen Agreement and what borders mean to Europe. Look at what's happening in Russia. Look what's happening with the defence. There's a lot of issues to work out. This seems to me to be the top of mind at the moment, but it is by no means the last.
Thanks for joining us, Nathan Smith, with our weekly Foreign Affairs Scope here on NBR Radio.
Join NBR's Intelligent Business Network today. www.nbr.co.nz/subscribe. NBR.
To trade, Indonesia has signalled a desire to increase its dairy trade with New Zealand ahead of an official visit by Prime Minister John Key later this year. An Indonesian Foreign Ministry official is enthusiastic about exploring the untapped potential of the bilateral relationship, including increased dairy imports and agricultural expertise. Indonesian Director General of Information, Esti Andayani, says Australia and Indonesia are like brothers that love and hate each other, but with New Zealand, we have to explore the relationship further. Indonesia is New Zealand's 12th largest trading partner. In the year to May, the value of exports to Indonesia dropped 14.3% to $849 million. Imports fell 10% to $807 million. The country's two respective foreign ministers, Retno Marsudi and Murray McCulley, recently agreed to boost bilateral trade to $4.38 billion by 2024. Boosting cooperation in defence, trade and investment sectors are other priorities. Jakarta is already the top choice of Asian cities for some New Zealand businesses, who say the city is easier than China or India to do business in. Indonesia is the world's fourth most populous nation with young and growing middle class. Home to more than 10 million people, Jakarta is a sprawling mix of modern business built among ancient villages. Notorious for gridlocked traffic and dirty waterways, the Indonesia capital is also fast-tracking infrastructure, housing, traffic and tourism improvements. Jakarta's Governor, Basuki Cahayapurnama, known as AHOC, is determined to fix the city's problems before his term finishes in 2017. The waterways have been clogged with rubbish for many years, contributing to annual flooding that causes millions of dollars of damage. Mr. Ahok says he used to be ashamed to bring visitors to the city. His solution was to install 4,800 closed-circuit TV monitors to police the dumping of rubbish. It seems to have worked. The river's unnoticeably cleaner. Mr. Ahok also keeps a close watch on his staff. All public servants clock in and out of work by scanning the back of their hand. He also monitors the turning on and off of the city's trucks and machinery. He says, I control them all using a smartphone. Marketing Jakarta as a tourist destination is also on the agenda. By 2017, Jakarta will be the gateway to what Mr. Ahok calls the new Bali, with plans to market the largely untapped beauty of the Thousand Islands, which are a short ferry ride from Jakarta. In the other direction, arrivals from Indonesia have steadily increased over the past 5 years to more than 15,000. Indonesia is New Zealand's 24th largest source of visitors. Securing a direct air service between New Zealand and Jakarta remains a key goal for Tourism New Zealand. To the US, a 14th candidate and 5th governor or ex-governor has officially entered the race for the Republican nomination in next year's US presidential election. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is pitching himself as a tough, straight-talking politician who can win over centrist primary voters in a crowded GOP field. He is a second-term governor and former US attorney. I don't seek the presidency for any other reason than I believe in my heart that I'm ready to work with you to restore America to its rightful place in the world, he said at a New Jersey high school where he started his climb into politics more than 3 decades ago with a successful campaign for class president. He added, in the end, leadership matters. It matters for our country, and American leadership matters for the world. He pointed to his record of rebuilding his state's troubled economy and overhauling an underfunded pension system. Mr. Christie's policies include simplifying the tax code, reducing business regulation, scaling back entitlement programs, and restoring America's diplomatic place on the world stage. He also called for the return of 4% economic growth, a target that also is at the centre of frontrunner Jeb Bush's campaign.
NBR Radio, Wednesday the 1st of July. I'm Andrew Patterson, and with me Rob Hosking. Rob, stats out of the Reserve Bank this morning suggesting that we are back on a housing lending binge.
Yeah, well, it could be. I mean, it may just be a spike. We have this is only 1 month's figures, but the timing of it's quite significant because this is the first month of borrowing figures that's come out since the Reserve Bank announced it's going to bring in more loan-to-value restrictions a little bit later this year. and it does look as if borrowers have decided, or investors have decided to get in before those restrictions come in. It's the biggest single monthly increase since November 2007, and that was just before everything sort of fell off a cliff. The average, it was 1.5 billion increase, or a bit over that, for the most recent month. The average increase the last year has been 882 million, which is, that's quite a bit less. So this is a real uptick. Now, the question is this just a spike because of the regulatory moves the Reserve Bank is making, or is it the shift? Are we going back on another binge of the kind we saw in the middle of the last decade?
And, of course, interesting enough, while the figures are a tick up, they're actually a long way below the 10 to 16% increases that we saw back in 2003, 2006.
That's right. That was where things were getting completely out of control. And we had those, that was the time of what we called the mortgage wars, where the banks were competing to drop rates down, and people were piling into it. And it wasn't just mortgages for that matter. It almost seemed every time you walk past a bank, they'd just about run out and stuff new credit cards into your pocket. I don't know about you, but back then it just seemed every few weeks I got another credit card offer in the mail. That was just our overall household debt just went berserk roughly between 2002 and 2007. And it stabilised at the time of the global financial crisis. It didn't really reduce much. Now, in dollar terms, in real terms, of course, it fell a little bit because GDP was growing. But and though even it started increasing again from around 2010, 2011, it was still increasing at a rate lower than the increase in nominal GDP, which means that in real terms, in terms of the country's overall liability, it was decreasing. What seems to be happening now, and this is just expanding from beyond the borrowing for housing, but to overall debt, we seem to be increasing again a little bit ahead of the rate of nominal GDP increase. That's got to be a worry, given our overall national debt levels. A little bit of an upturn is probably not that big a surprise, but really, if we've got to hope this is just a blip because of the Reserve Bank restrictions. If it's not, then the prospects of interest rate cuts, you'd have to be. We know interest rates are meant to be being lowered again, probably later this month, and maybe again a little bit later. But seriously, if people are going to start piling into debt again, then there's going to be a limit to how far the Reserve Bank is going to be prepared to cut interest rates.
Absolutely. I like the term that you've introduced into your piece too. You call it prudence fatigue amongst New Zealand households.
Yeah, I think so. There's a horrible term economists use called deleveraging, which basically means paying off your debt. And that's been very much the story of New Zealand households since 2008. Where there has been quite a concerted effort to reduce, to pay off debt, and not just in households. In fact, our business borrowing has been quite low. It has fallen, and even with the low interest rates, there has not been the sort of big upturn in business borrowing you would have expected to see over the past few years. Particularly, and this is probably one of the more positive signs about our economy the last few years, is that there's been quite an upturn in business investment, but it hasn't debt fueled. Now, of course, we know from mood surveys going to come out this week. There's the employment survey on Friday, and then the ANZ business conference on yesterday. The business mood does seem to be faltering a little bit, and I don't think those surveys are a one-off. I do think things are flattening a little bit, and so one good thing about the situation we're in is that even though the mood is flattening, there isn't a big tranche of debt sitting there that has been built up over the expansion over the last couple of years. So that's one thing about the current economic outlook. But yeah, we're going to have to watch those that household borrowing quite closely, and certainly the Reserve Bank is going to be watching it very closely.
Thanks for joining us, Rob Hosking, on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio with Bayleys, New Zealand's leading commercial real estate company.
In motoring news, Too Cheap Cars, which has built a nationwide chain of car yards selling used imports since starting 4 years ago, says it plans to enter the market for new cars by parallel importing Toyota, Honda and Mazda vehicles. Chief Executive and 50% shareholder Eugene Williams claims his company will be able to undercut the official dealerships by as much as $10,000 on the price of a new car, and he's targeting 10% of the new car Japanese market in New Zealand within 3 years. Too Cheap Cars plans to open its first new car showroom in Green Lane, Auckland, in the next 2 months. Mr. Williams told Business Desk his company will buy the cars from dealerships in Japan rather than from the manufacturers, but they will still be able to be sold as new in New Zealand because they won't have been registered in Japan. He said in Japan every dealership has a quota. They have to buy them whether they can sell them or not, so there is excess stock in the market. Too Cheap Cars was ranked second in Deloitte's 2014 Fast 50 survey with sales growth of 1,294% and won the accounting firm's award for fastest growing retail and consumer products business. Mr. Williams says the cars will carry the manufacturer's warranty and his firm will stand behind our cars. The industry body for New Zealand dealerships says it's concerned about Too Cheap Cars' latest move. Chief Executive David Crawford said buying cars from dealers in Japan suggests they have been pre-registered and claiming them as new in New Zealand may contravene local law. The vehicles could also become problematic for owners. Mr. Crawford said our concern would be that it creates problems for the consumer that are not insignificant. There may be flow-on effects with warranties, recalls. If not managed correctly, that will create problems down the track. Mr. Crawford said he hasn't yet studied the Too Cheap Cars plan in enough detail to make a more substantive response. However, Mr. Williams said New Zealand consumers are effectively being gouged by existing new car dealers. He says, I understand New Zealand is a small market, but in this day and age, when everyone is buying from Amazon or whatever, new cars in New Zealand are grossly overpriced. Mr. Williams said that meant new car buyers were mainly government agencies and corporates, while ordinary consumers bought second-hand. Mr. Williams said, we will run the new cars as we run used, where high volume, low margin. Too Cheap Cars was one of the first potential investors last year to show interest in a proposal to operate services on regional air routes abandoned by Air New Zealand through a new venture, Kiwi Regional Airlines. The plan didn't proceed. In a statement at the time, Mr. Williams said Too Cheap Cars had turnover of $40 million in its last financial year. Its other shareholder is listed as Yosuke Sena. To a market update, Newplex Industries, the specialty chemicals maker, won't resume a share buyback program until after it reports annual earnings in mid-August. The Auckland-domiciled company suspended the program last month, adopting a new policy where it won't buy shares on market while directors have board papers in the lead-up to their regular meetings. Newplex today said it will keep the suspension until after the release of its 2015 full-year result, which is expected on August 14. Earlier this year, Newplex decided to buy back 5% of its shares on issue after a series of asset sales helped reduce the firm's debt and strengthen the balance sheet. The shares fell 1% to $4.16 and have soared 41% this year, making it the third best performer on the S&P NZX All Index.
NBR Radio on Wednesday the 1st of July. I'm Andrew Patterson, and Greece has become the first developed country in history to default on an IMF loan. Joining me with more, Jason Walls. Jason, significant development, but really all very predictable over the last 72 hours.
Yeah, everybody saw this coming. It's something that I've been talking about on radio quite extensively for the past couple of months, and every time I've been on, I've been saying a default is coming, and it's not just me that's been saying this. It's all the punters and the analysts and the economists have all been pointing in this direction. The only lifeline that they had was reaching a deal with their creditors, which they've been unable to do. And as the news just broke about an hour ago, the IMF have confirmed they received no payments from the Greeks. So it means that they've become, as you said, the first developed country in the history of just the history to default on an IMF loan.
Where does that leave Greece now, really? Because essentially it's in the hands of its creditors.
Yep. So they have a couple of other creditors. They've got the ECB, which is the European Central Bank, and the European Commission as well. Interesting enough, on a little bit of a side note, that there was a crowdfunding page set up for Greece in the days leading up. And they actually raised, I think it was like 130,000 euros, which is quite a lot. But then you've got to put that in perspective. And I think the best comment I saw about it was that they would have to, the crowdfunding site would have to raise 260,000 euros a day for 24 years for them to be able to pay the IMF loan alone. So they were nowhere near close. But they've still got a couple of options. But again, patience is wearing very thin within Europe right now with Greece.
We're left with a situation where obviously we wait for the outcome of the referendum on Sunday, but to a certain extent, whatever way that goes, it doesn't really change the problem that Greece is in, and the options are now becoming increasingly more limited, aren't they?
Yeah, they're indebted up to their eyeballs, and it's Alexis Tsipras and his left-wing government were elected on this anti-austerity measures platform, and now they're telling the Greek people, hey, well, do you want austerity measures now, essentially, with this vote? And it's really divided the nation. You've got a lot of people calling for a yes vote, saying, we do want the austerity measures because we want to remain in the Eurozone. And the Greek people are slowly coming to, well, probably not even slowly anymore, it's becoming more of a wave, to understand that if they don't accept the austerity measures, it's going to have huge implications for the country. Because it's been very well documented in publications all around the world what will happen if they get kicked out of the Eurozone.
This is the interesting part, actually. We know that the Tsipras government was elected earlier in the year on this anti-austerity package, but I wonder how much the view of Greeks has changed when they have thought about the implications of leaving the euro and how that might actually affect Sunday's vote.
Yeah, it probably is, because when they first came in, it was huge unrest within Greece, because the idea that the previous government was going to have to cut back on some things, the Greeks didn't like that at all. A lot of their GDP is comprised of pensions and things like that, and they're paying a whole bunch of money for that, and public sector wages as well. So obviously, if you're going to lose something, you've got something to stand to gain from a party coming and saying, actually, we're not going to cut this off. But now, it seems like everybody's just saying, we really need to make some cuts or else everybody's going to suffer, including me.
It's difficult to get a sense of which way this vote is going to go because, we had the no rally yesterday, the yes rally today. Yep. They seem to be attracting similar numbers. The polls seem to be split. Yeah. Very difficult if you end up getting a sort of almost a split decision on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be the worst outcome because already there is such a lack of clarity. To have a split vote would... essentially that would produce even less clarity and would make it even harder. We talked about this yesterday briefly, that Tsipras is not really leading the country. He's telling the people to decide what he should do when he should be doing it. And, you've got to kind of hand it to him. He's just telling the Greek people, hey, it's all up to you now. But at the same time, he's campaigning for a no vote. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
The possibility, though, that the Troika could put together some sort of an administrator into Greece, is that another option as well?
Oh, I'm not sure at this stage. It could be, but I don't see the Greeks really responding well to some outside intervention and having somebody controlling their funds from the inside. It seems like a logical step, potentially, but again, it would have to be something that would be decided in the Greek parliament, but they wouldn't look at that too favorably, would be my opinion.
We wait with interest for the decision of the referendum vote. The Greeks going to the polls on Sunday. The whole world will be watching that, and there will be plenty of interest in the result as well too. Jason Walls, thanks for joining us on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio. With Clooney Restaurant, an unparalleled private dining room choice. NBR Radio.
Back to TY Point. The TY Point aluminium smelters owners are keeping their options open and have made no decision to keep the plant operating, according to Meridian Energy Chief Executive Mark Binns. Mr. Binns says they're playing that card very close to their chests. They've retained the right to be able to walk away or basically cancel the contract from the beginning of 2017. NZ Aluminium Smelter, or NZAS, is nearly 80% owned by Rio Tinto, and Japan's Sumitomo owns the rest. Meridian has granted NZAS an extension of just over a month to August 3 before the owners have to decide on its future. All other terms of the 2013 agreement remaining unchanged. Mr. Binns says, from where I sit, I don't think they've made that decision on whether to keep the smelter open. He says clearly they've been speaking to a number of parties in the marketplace, including ourselves. I don't think they've made a decision that they're staying at all. I think that's still very much in the balance. Mr. Burns says whether the smelter stays open is going to depend on the electricity deal that they can get going forward. He says at the end of the day, this is 40% of our load. It's worthy of quite intensive management time to establish exactly what our position should be and how far we should be involved in solving the long-term issues that NZAS has with its electricity. NZAS pays less for its electricity than any other power user in New Zealand. NZAS Chief Executive Greta Stevens in a statement said, nevertheless, NZAS is one of the most operationally efficient smelters in the world, but pays one of the highest prices for power. NZAS's electricity costs, combined with high transmission costs and historically depressed aluminium prices, continue to place significant pressure on the smelter. Ms. Stevens says NZAS pays 10 times more for electricity transmission than other smelters internationally and welcomes the Electricity Authority's recent paper acknowledging that NZAS pays $50 million a year for transmission infrastructure it receives no benefit from. An NZAS spokeswoman says Ms. Stevens won't be available for interviews. For more on this story, go to nbr.co.nz. Let's talk petrol. Z Energy, the listed service station chain, said its planned $785 million purchase of rival Chevron New Zealand's Caltex-branded network won't drive up prices at the pump because the target doesn't have retail price-setting power and the market will remain highly competitive. Z Energy makes the argument in its application to the Commerce Commission for clearance to buy the rival, a public version of which is published today. Parts of the application have been redacted, including details of commercial sales of aviation fuel, where it notes that Z Energy and Chevron only overlap at Auckland International Airport. Marine fuel oils, where it says Chevron isn't a significant player, and bitumen, where it notes that imports help constrain prices. It says there would be no reduction in competition in commercial sales of petrol and diesel because independent distributors and retailers will retain a choice of two alternatives to their existing wholesale supplier in BP and Mobil, and potentially in the North Island a third in Gull. Z sees no increased market power in truck stops, which it says are in abundance. The petrol station chain joined the NZX in 2013 when Infratil and the New Zealand Superannuation Fund sold down their stakes in an IPO offering that raised $840 million. The company has said it's committed to running a multi-brand strategy following the acquisition of Caltex and Challenge brands from Chevron, a deal that would give it some 49% of the retail petrol station market. It cites analysis of retail pricing data by Jerry Hausman, a professor of economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, to argue that the removal of Caltex as an independent brand is unlikely to result in a statistically significant price rise in a given geographical area, based on local markets with a radius of 5k and even 2k. Z Energy says in its application, Chevron's retail operating model means it does not have contractual ability to set retail pricing, which limits its competitive influence in the retail market. This would continue under Z ownership. The retail market would remain highly competitive with a broad range of retail fuel ownership structures, which gives rise to distinct pricing incentives and manifests in a variety of service offerings. Midstream participants would be reduced to 3 from 4, but that wouldn't hurt competition because of governance arrangements in relation to key shared assets, such as the refinery to Auckland and Wiri to Auckland airport pipelines. It said 14 brands, including Gallon foodstuffs, will continue at the retail level, with meaningful pricing independence from the midstream participants. Z Energy has a 26% share of New Zealand Refining, operator of the nation's only oil refinery, although the deal won't increase that holding because Chevron sold its 11% stake into the market. Z has previously said it expects to benefit from acquiring Chevron's business through procurement, operating cost and supply chain efficiencies. A Caltex fact sheet says it has 147 outlets in New Zealand, supplies fuel to the aviation and shipping industries, and is a partner in the AA Fuel Card loyalty scheme. Z Energy is a shareholder in the rival Flybuys scheme, and its website says it has more than 200 outlets. According to the Commerce Commission's website, a decision on the application is due by July 15, although it says the date is likely to be extended. The deal is also subject to approval from the OIO.
NBR Radio, Wednesday the 1st of July, Andrew Patterson, and with me, Auckland Transport blog editor Matt Lowry. Matt, you've been looking at the Green Man campaign that's been launched by Auckland Transport. How are you assessing it?
I think it's a bit of a waste of time, to be honest. There's a couple of things. First of all, it's just plain out creepy to have people dressed in green suits and try and walk you across the street. They're targeting intersections where people are crossing with the lights and doing exactly what they should do. So it kind of seems a bit pointless there. People know how to cross on on green lights and wait for them. What's more important is to look at why people aren't doing that, and that is because people want to get to destinations. Often intersections they don't cycle fast enough for pedestrians, so there's long waits, or they're not frequent enough, so people crossing where they can to get to places where they're going to shops or see friends or whatever it might be.
One of the issues which irritates me as a driver, and this is becoming a real problem in Auckland, kind of people jaywalking. They really just have no sense of following any of the flashing green man or anything like that. They just kind of do their own thing. So, do you think we actually should be putting more emphasis on pedestrians actually not jaywalking, putting themselves in danger?
People have to be careful, obviously, when they're crossing the road. And Auckland Transport have another campaign at the same time trying to address that. But again, I have problems with that. One of the things is people are looking at their phones or eating food or something like that when they're crossing the road. If they're not checking the road first, they're probably not going to be looking at a campaign to tell them to look at the road. So there's kind of a bit of a gap missing there. We have to look at why people are doing, why people cross the road without, outside the crossing. And as I said, there's a lot of reasons why that happens. What we need to do, particularly in the city centre, where there's a huge amount of pedestrians. Queen Street has around 60,000 people a day walking up and down it. This is around 10,000 cars the last time I saw. So there's quite a big disparity there, and the reason for that is because there is so much there that people are walking to, going, using that to go places, and so we need to look at what we can do to make that more careful. We also need to be making sure that we design our cities so that we are focusing on what people are doing as well. So, as I said, in the city centre, perhaps we need to be looking at, you're actually driving in a different environment. It's not a state highway where you're travelling at 100 kilometres an hour. Queen Street in particular has a 30 kilometre speed limit. You should be travelling at that, and are people actually doing that and making sure that they can stop in time? Use the example perhaps that if you're driving a car and a car in front of you stops, you're required to be able to stop and drive safely enough that you can stop in time so you don't crash into that car. And obviously, if you have an accident, insurance will keep you on those issues as well. So we need to be looking at a holistic approach as to how we address these issues.
You raised in your piece the idea of more shared space, and obviously there has been success with Fort Lane and so forth, but those are quite low traffic volume areas where that works. I mean, realistically, you couldn't turn Queen Street into a shared zone, isn't it? You have to choose one or the other. Either it's for the pedestrians or the drivers.
Well, actually, Queen Street is an interesting case because there's actually not a single reason for a car to even need to be in Queen Street. There's no driveways, there's no loading zones, there's no building entrances other than for people walking. So there's actually very, very little reason for cars to be there. So you could actually put Queen Street to change the configuration quite a bit, and some of Auckland Transport's plans around light rail look like that they might do that they might actually remove cars completely from the area. So there's a lot that can be done. It's currently a 4-lane road. I'm not sure of the exact figures, but cars would have around 60-70% of the space on the street. Yet, as I said, there's only about 10,000 cars a day travelling up and down Queen Street versus about 60,000 people. So we need to look at the balance and make sure we've got those right, because can Queen Street operate with perhaps just 2 lanes instead of 4 lanes, and will that operate? That 10,000 vehicles a day over 4 lanes is actually very low by most standards. That's even single lane roads. Most single lane roads carry more than that. So we need to look at whether that's the right allocation of space.
Auckland Transport says the total social cost of motor vehicle injury crashes in 2013, which includes injuries recorded by the police, hospitals and ACC, was estimated at approximately $3.1 billion. That's at June 2014 prices. So where do you think the money should be spent in terms of promoting pedestrian engagement in the way this campaign is trying to achieve?
I think it needs to be more of a holistic approach, looking at, yes, pedestrians need to be careful, but again, I'm not sure how many people would actually deliberately walk out in front of a car if they know one's coming. So what is it that's causing people to do that? If they're distracted, then a campaign to stop the distraction is not really going to work that well, I wouldn't have thought. So, focusing on how we can make it safer for them. Things like intersection treatment, so that when people are crossing a street, that they can do so easily, without having to fear for their lives. More frequent pedestrian crossings, it depends on the area, of course, as well. So in the city centre where you have high pedestrian volumes, it needs to be quite frequent. You need to be cycle quickly so that people can get around without risking running across an intersection. So we need to look at the whole gambit of how we fix these issues, not just an education saying don't do this, or have some creepy man in a suit come and grab hold of you and walk you across the street.
Are you modelling this behaviour yourself?
I would sometimes. I will cross outside of an intersection if I need to get somewhere, and that's the most convenient way to do it. Said waiting at a light for 2 minutes to cross a road when there's no cars coming seems a bit silly to me sometimes.
Thanks for joining us, Matt Lowry, Auckland transport blogger, with us on NBR Radio.
NBR Radio. Free to air online with business news you can use.
I'm Grant Walker with Last Call. Here's what's trending on NBR Online. Milk powder futures decline ahead of tonight's GDT auction. The TY smelter strikes a poor me pose. TrueScreen raises $1.6 million. The new duty-free brand start today at Auckland Airport. And the primary sector boot camp. What is it? And where is it? To find out more, log on to nbr.co.nz or stay tuned. Those stories coming up next on NBR Radio. Court news. A substantial foreign exchange dealer and currency remitter is fighting back against Kiwibank's attempts to close its banking accounts and facilities, a decision that would probably end its business. Auckland-based eTrans International Finance, established in 2003, last week won an order from the High Court prohibiting Kiwibank from closing its accounts and facilities until further order from the court. And in the High Court at Auckland today, Justice Anne Hinton ruled the substantive matter should be heard at the earliest possible date. According to its website, which is mostly not written in English, eTrans is a well-known and respected foreign exchange company that provides the best rates and services. Its philosophy is to provide multiple and flexible financial services to new immigrants, international students and tourists through engaging in and facilitating local and international trade and contributing to the uninterrupted flow of peoples over international borders. The Chinese company operates on Auckland's Queen Street, with Companies Office records listing Xiaohua Sun as the sole director and shareholder. In March, Kiwibank told eTrans it was closing the company's accounts because it considered eTrans' business posed too great a risk to the bank under the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financing of Terrorism Act. eTrans has banked with Kiwibank since 2004. The Reserve Bank told the country's banks in January this year the legislation does not require them to take a broad-brush approach against money remitters after some expressed concerns banks were indiscriminately terminating their accounts. eTrans had opened its most recent account with Kiwibank in early 2014, but was told the bank had had a change in policy over accounts associated with money remittance or money-changing services. The company started proceedings against the bank on March 31st, alleging breach of contract. eTrans is being represented by high-profile QC Jim Farmer, who indicates the hearing will require 2 weeks. But Kiwibank's lawyer Andrew Butler says it's keen to get the matter, which it thinks might only require a week, heard as soon as possible, particularly as it has to maintain eTrans accounts in the meantime. He says the case is likely to be of interest to all the banks. Justice Hinton says eTrans' proposed timetable, which suggested a fixture in February next year, is fairly relaxed. It doesn't need this matter to be heard in a hurry. She ruled the matter be given priority for a 2-week fixture at the earliest possible date. In business news, Auckland-based natural health product and nutritionals provider New Image Group is building up its goat milk-based product production to target the Chinese, Southeast Asian and Middle Eastern markets. Founded in 1984, New Image Group's turnover exceeds $100 million. One of its divisions, NIG Nutritionals, which has produced the goat milk-based products for the last 4 years, has increased its revenue from $5 million in 2011 to more than $50 million this year. NIG Nutritional sells more than 2,000 tonnes of goat milk-based products each year, about 2.2 million 900-gram can equivalents. Sales have more than doubled over the past 4 years, with the subsidiary accounting for over 40% of NIG's total sales. Yesterday, the company's sole goat milk supply source, Oete Farms in southern Auckland, opened new facilities, with Food Safety Minister Joe Goodhue in attendance. Oete runs about 2,400 does and employs 8 staff and plans to increase production to more than 300,000 ms per kilogram a year. General Manager Guy Wills says from a nutritional and competitive perspective, NIG identified goat milk as a fit for its business growth objectives. He said goat milk has significant nutritional benefits, appeals to a health-conscious consumer, is seen by many as an alternative to those who cannot tolerate cow milk, has less allergenic issues and is showing rapidly growing interest and acceptance in many markets, particularly Asia. It's understood that goat milk infant formula accounts for about 7% of New Zealand's infant formula exports. Mr. Wills says although New Zealand has a well-established farming capability, commercial goat farming has tended to be a relatively closed shop in terms of shared knowledge and experience, which is one of the reasons it teamed up with Oeti Farm. NIG's goat milk-based brand include Baby Steps, which focuses on early-stage nutrition, Symbiotics, which is pitched to all age groups, and Bioactive, a goat milk powder and supplement range. Mr. Wills says how products are distributed and marketed in China has changed profoundly, presenting many opportunities for smaller and innovative companies. Mr. Wills says the understanding of and use of rapidly evolving hybrid direct channels and online purchasing, which incorporate elements of the direct selling model and traditional retail selling, are opening these opportunities.
NBR Radio, Wednesday the 1st of July. Andrew Patterson and with me Jenny Ruth. Jenny, developments involving Meridian and Tiwai, what's the latest?
Yes, the Meridian's given the owners of the smelter, Rio Tinto and Japan Sumitomo, an extra month and a bit until August the 3rd before they have to make a decision about the smelter's future.
So at this point, there doesn't appear to be any indication either way as to where their thinking actually lies.
No, I mean, I would have thought that it's obvious that NZAS is trying to get the best electricity price that it can, and that, well, Mr. Bin says that's going to determine whether or not it stays open or not. Clearly, it's trying to get Meridian's competitors to supply 172 megawatts of power at a cheaper price than Meridian is charging. Now, NZAS already gets the cheapest electricity power in New Zealand, although it says that it pays 10 times the rate for transmission than its international competitors do. The agreement that they signed back in 2013 allows NZAS to reduce the amount that it buys from Meridian from 572 megawatts down to 400 megawatts. So that's where that 172 megawatts comes from.
Does this all ultimately come down to the power price? Because obviously they've also had the benefit of a decline in the currency as well too over the last year.
Well, they've had the benefit of a decline in the currency, and they've also had the benefit of a better world market for aluminium prices. In April, they said they made an underlying profit of $56 million in 2014, and that was a turnaround from losses in the previous 2 years. They've also got the prospect of a very big sweetener. The Electricity Authority has suggested changes to the way people pay for transmission charges, and if its current proposal is accepted, then NZAS would get a $50 million a year reduction in its transmission bill.
So what does it have to do? I mean, obviously that would be a significant benefit to them. Are they involved in that process at all, or effectively they just have to hope that might be the outcome that they're going to get?
Well, obviously they've been talking to the authority and they've definitely made submissions, and clearly they've convinced the authority that they are paying too much for transmission. I spoke to an analyst a little while ago after the authority put out its recent paper, and it was the analyst's view, that was Andrew Harvey-Green from Forsyth Bar, that prospect of that $50 million a year reduction in costs, that was going to be more than sufficient to keep the smelter open. But clearly, the only person that can tell us whether it will for sure is NZAS's owners.
And do you think that the fact that there has been a 1 month delay is encouraging, or is that potentially suggesting that there could be, perhaps more problems down the track?
My initial reaction was that it was encouraging, but after talking to Mr. Binns, the Chief Executive of Meridian, Mark Binns, I'm not so sure. I mean, he's saying that his impression is that the smelters owners are keeping all options open.
And at this point, very unlikely, obviously, the government is going to come to the party.
Well, Mr. Bin says there's a snowball's chance of hell of the government repeating the $30 million sweetener they gave NZAS in 2013 to get them to sign this agreement. And we do have the Finance Minister, Bill English, on record as saying that NZAS won't be getting another bite of the cherry from his government.
So we wait now for the update in a month's time.
Well, I just want to add that it's not just Meridian that's affected by this, it's all the other generators, and Contact Energy and Genesis Energy in particular. They're the ones that will be most affected for the worse if the smelter was closed. So they're the ones probably that the owners of the smelter are negotiating with over getting a cheaper price.
Jenny Ruth, thanks for joining us on NBR Radio.
NBR. Need to hire? Try our online recruitment platform, www.nbrtalent.co.nz.
Market news. TrueScreen, the NZAX-listed cervical cancer test developer, raised $1.56 million in an oversubscribed share purchase plan to help fund its push into Asia. The Auckland-based company said it was seeking $1 million through the share purchase plan, but accepted all subscriptions. The share sale was at 25 cents apiece and accounted for 3.8% of shares on issue. The shares last traded at 26 cents. The share purchase plan was one of two capital raising initiatives, the other being a placement to institutional and professional investors, injecting $4.83 million in total. Chief Executive Martin Dillon says we view these two capital raising initiatives as a dual validation of our commercial strategy for both our institutional and retail investors. The new capital raised from these initiatives gives us the ability to continue our expansion of the commercial operations of TrueScreen and build on the extensive success we've had in the past year with our international growth. Last month, TrueScreen reported an annual loss of $692,000 on revenue of $1.57 million. The company has had several breakthroughs in the Chinese market, securing certification from the Chinese Food and Drug Administration, as well as Thailand's Food and Drug Administration, and signing two deals that are expected to generate almost $2 million in revenue over the next 14 months. In People News, racing entrepreneur and pet food millionaire Tony Quinn has bought a central Queenstown 3-unit luxury apartment for $7 million. The price is believed to be a record for a central Queenstown home, according to the local Mountain Scene newspaper, which reported the deal. If the price was slightly above market, it was no problem to Mr. Quinn and wife Christina. Last month, they sold their VIP pet foods for $410 million to Sydney-based Quadrant Private Equity. They founded the company in 1994. They'll retain a shareholding, and their oldest son, Kent, will retain a management role. The company has 6 manufacturing plants and 600 staff. Meanwhile, Land Records give a rating value of $1.7 million for the 5-level Q1 apartment in Queenstown, with floor area of 229 square metres, located opposite O'Regan's Wharf in Queenstown Bay. The $7 million sale to Quinn Corp was registered in April. He acquired the property from Amanda and Warren Law. Mr. Quinn was also recently in the news for his purchase of Hampton Downs, a motorsport park at Te Kauwhata, south of Auckland, for $15.5 million. It complements his family-oriented motorsport venue in central Otago, Highlands Motorsport Park. The local Queenstown newspaper reports he has quit involvement in the Race to the Sky hill climb up the Cadrona Valley to the top of Pisa Range. The track is owned by Southern Hemisphere Proving Grounds. Mr. Quinn wasn't prepared to meet costs, which have risen from $35,000 8 years ago to $90,000.
Wednesday, the 1st of July, this is NBR Radio. I'm Andrew Patterson, and with me, Hamish McNichol. Hamish, we don't actually get many cases where the banks don't want a particular customer's account, but that is actually at the centre of a legal dispute between this particular company, which deals in foreign exchange, and its bank, Kiwibank.
Yeah, it's a good point. I hadn't actually thought of it like that. But they want to close this company. It's called eTrans International Finance. And they want to close its accounts and banking facilities basically because it says it's too risky. And this is in light of the anti-money laundering legislation, which is coming at front of mind for banks at the moment. eTrans has banked with Kiwibank since 2004. in about March, Kiwibank said they wanted to close that account. E-Trans said, well, no, that's unfair, and so it's basically ended up in the courts.
Its problem, of course, is that without a banker having an account, having a banking relationship, it can't transact the foreign exchange that it does. And it seems by all intended purposes, it's been operating fairly legitimately in its 10 years in business.
Yeah, so in March, when this decision was first made, basically the company commenced proceedings to say, well, hold on, you guys are wanting to close their account, but if that happens, we're going to shut down. So they asked the High Court to basically prevent Kiwibank from doing that until it could bring a substantive claim against the bank, which is alleging breach of contract for shutting down its account. And yeah, I mean, it's been in existence for more than 10 years, 12 years. It's certainly hard to find out too much about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything bad at the same time. And Justice Mary Peters, in fact, when she did tell Kiwibank that they had to keep the account open until the substantive hearing was heard, called it a substantial business. So it sounds like it's a reasonably big player, and just because it's not necessarily high profile or that well known doesn't mean that it's not a legitimate or successful business in its own right.
Interestingly, the Reserve Bank told the country's banks in January this year the legislation does not require them to take a broad brush approach, quote unquote, against money remitters. But interesting enough, in evidence from the company, it suggests that many of them are. Many of the banks have actually closed down these accounts because they just don't want to be subject to the risk that comes with them.
Yeah, so E-Trans's managing director, he's also the sole director and shareholder, Zhao Hua's son, when he gave evidence in March, he said that 8 of the 15 Auckland-based specialist money remittance and currency exchange providers have had their accounts closed with banks recently. And the Reserve Bank, as you said before, had this brought to its attention before. And so basically just told the banks, just because these people are involved with this work doesn't mean you have to completely shut them off straight away. And in fact, this company here, E-Trans, does report as part of the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering Financing of Terrorism Act. It is listed as a reporting entity to the Department of Internal Affairs. So it does all look legit, and like maybe Kiwibank is jumping the gun a bit, but you can certainly understand why there's a bit of nerves at the same time.
Obviously, the outcome of this case will have far-reaching implications on the other banks as well in terms of this particular type of business.
Yeah, E-Trans is being represented by Jim Farmer, QC, who's fairly, heavyweight in the legal scene, and he's saying that the hearing will probably take about 2 weeks, expected to call evidence from a few accountants and from people from the company themselves and things like that. And Kiwibank's lawyer, Andrew Butler, this morning indicated that yes, this case is likely to be of interest to a lot of the banks, but he thinks it will probably only take about a week. And basically, obviously, they want to get this case heard as quickly as possible because they have to maintain this account in the meantime. Whereas, as Justice Anne Hinton indicated today, E-Trans is a bit more relaxed about how quickly this all gets resolved.
Any indication as to when the hearing is likely to occur?
There was the date of February next year touted about in court this morning, but that was depending on a 2-week fixture, and that's what they're seeking. But Justice Hinton has given this case priority, so it could be a bit earlier, but the way that the commercial courts are, these things can take quite a bit of time. So certainly not any time in the next month or so.
Indeed, a case to be followed with interest. Thanks for joining us, Hamish McNichol, with us on NBR Radio.
You're listening to NBR Radio. Upgrade to My NBR Radio with a smartphone-only subscription to NBR Online today for free and receive unlimited access to NBR Online on your smartphone until August 31st. Visit www.nbr.co.nz/free.
In politics, the harmful digital communications bill passed its third and final reading last night. Its criminal and safe harbour provisions will come into effect once the legislation is given royal assent, expected Monday morning. Work will then begin on appointing the approved agency. So, the bill's key elements. A fine of up to $50,000 for an individual or up to $200,000 for a body corporate, or up to 2 years jail for posting or sending a harmful digital communication, otherwise known as cyberbullying, with a post likely to cause distress. The bill covers racist, sexist and religiously intolerant comments, plus those about disabilities or sexual orientation. Up to 3 years jail for the new crime of incitement to suicide. An approved agency will advocate on behalf of complainants. The aim is that the agency will be able to make direct contact with web publishers and social media sites like Facebook and Twitter, where a member of the public often has trouble getting heard. If the approved agency makes no headway, a complaint is escalated to a district court judge, and web publishers can opt in to a safe harbour provision protecting them from liability if they agree to take down allegedly offending material on demand, or at least within a grace period of 48 hours. The bill faced criticism from everyone from Labour's Claire Curran, who argued the safe harbour provision made a mockery of the bill's intent, to ACT's David Seymour, who said it would criminalise children over 14 and undermine free speech. But in the end, it passed easily, 116-5, as only Mr Seymour and 4 Green MPs voted against it. The legislation drew immediate flack on social media. Former Internet New Zealand Chief Executive Vikram Kumar wondered if Sean Plunkett, cleared by the BSA over his comments about author Eleanor Catton, would have wound up in jail under the HDC. As with any new law, it will take precedent-setting cases to define its boundaries. Tech Liberty co-founder Thomas Beagle said he was disappointed the flawed law had passed. The Council for Civil Liberties Executive Committee member has criticised the bill for undermining free speech and questioned whether many of its measures will prove practical. He's also asked why the online world should have different rules over comments and defamation than the offline one. To market news, veteran corporate raider Ron Briley is bringing his latest investment vehicle, Mercantile Investment, to the NZX with a listing scheduled for next week. It said in a statement to the ASX yesterday, the Sydney-based investment firm has been approved by stock market operator NZX for a compliance listing on July 6. The move makes it easier for New Zealand investors to buy shares in the firm, which had 3,570 shareholders as at August 14, 2014. Mercantile has been mounting takeovers for distressed firms sitting on cash or other assets and is currently making a hostile on-market bid for ASX-listed Ask Funding. In May, an attempt to buy Phosphate Australia was knocked back. ASX-listed Mercantile last traded at 12.5 Australian cents, below the May 31st post-tax net tangible asset value of 14.17. Saron seized control of Mercantile, then called India Equities Fund in 2012, when shareholders agreed to a deal giving him 54% of the company and its chairmanship in return for his stakes in Copper Strike, Trinity Group, ING Community Living Group, Australian Pharmaceutical Industries and Trojan Equity. The holding has since been watered down to 46% after Mercantile completed a takeover of Murchison Metals via a scheme of arrangement which let investors take either cash or shares. Since then, he brought in his old comrades Ron Langley and Gary Weiss via a $2 million Australian dollar placement. Mercantile is at least the third diversified investment vehicle for Sir Ron, who built Guinness Peak Group after being forced out of Briley Investments in the early 1990s. The empire named for him had struggled to recover from the 1987 share market crash and now exists as Duoco Leisure, with its primary listing on the Singapore Stock Exchange. As at December 31, Mercantile held cash and equivalents of 2.6 million Australian, with 3.9 million in listed company shares held for trading and 31.8 million of financial assets available for sale. In receivership news, Westpac is the biggest creditor in the collapse of a subcontractor to the Central Plains Water Scheme in Canterbury. Aqueduct New Zealand was placed in receivership recently, and the first receiver's report says Westpac is owed $4.97 million. Unsecured creditors are owed $2.3 million. The total outstanding amount owed to all creditors is $8.1. Receiver Colin Gower of BDO is continuing to trade the company and retain staff. The assets of the company consist of a mobile pipe manufacturing factory and ancillary machinery at Hororata with a book value of $6.1 million and scrap pipe stock with an undetermined value. The receivers said at the date of our appointment, accounts receivable of $1.56 million were outstanding, of which a certain amount is subject to dispute. Another 3 related companies have also been placed in receivership: Can Power, Galley Holdings and Bosch Irrigation. Central Plains Water Chief Executive Derek Crombie says the irrigator is unaffected by the collapse of its pipe supplier and is pushing ahead with further stages of the scheme with the benefit of government grants and funding support.
NBR Radio with Baileys, New Zealand's leading commercial real estate company.
Dairy news. The price for New Zealand's key dairy export whole milk powder is set to decline further at tonight's GDT auction as dairy companies head into the new season and ramp up production. The current July whole milk powder futures contract last traded on the NZX at US $2,200 a tonne, 3.7% below the winning price of $2,285 a tonne at the last GDT auction on June 16. Traders also pulled back their expectations for longer-dated contracts, with the November futures contract priced at US $2,310 a tonne, down 1.9% compared to the last auction. Fonterra, which accounts for the bulk of whole milk powder sold on the GDT, will increase its volume on the platform to 15,750 tonnes from 10,000 at the last auction, as production increases in the lead-up to peak supply in October. Weaker dairy prices are weighing on New Zealand's economy, cited as a reason for decade-low rural confidence levels, weaker business confidence, and are firmly on the radar of the Reserve Bank, which has begun cutting interest rates to bolster slowing growth. Dairy prices have remained lower for longer amid higher global supplies in New Zealand, Europe and the US, and weak demand from key markets in China and Russia. AgriHQ's senior dairy analyst Susan Kilsby said the expectations that prices will rise seems to be getting continually delayed. It's still relatively pessimistic at the moment. Prices at the current levels are certainly not sustainable. Reserve Bank Governor Graham Wheeler has flagged a weak dairy sector as one of the three key risks to the nation's financial stability, saying about a quarter of farmers were operating in negative cash flow this season and were relying on short-term loans to cover their working capital. If prices didn't recover, that would put stress on parts of the sector, which in turn could taint banks' loan books. Whole milk powder futures were previously trading at a premium to GDT, signalling expectations for a rebound in pricing from low levels, but were now trading at a discount, according to OMF Financial Markets Director Nigel Brunel, who expects prices to fall between 5 and 10% at tonight's auction. First New Zealand Capital Head of Derivatives, Mike McIntyre, said price increases are more likely to come from a supply correction rather than demand correction at this stage, just because the amount of cheap capital in the world has seen a whole lot of additional supply come online. Still, AgriHQ's Ms. Kilby said there appeared to be little on the horizon to stimulate prices in the short term. She says they will increase again at some point, but at the moment the buyers are reasonably well covered, so there's nothing to stimulate demand in the short term. She said the long-term outlook for the industry is still positive, but it's going to take the bulk of the current 2015-16 season to recover. Market news. DNZ Property Fund, which is more than halfway through an asset sale program, has sold an office block in Auckland's Albany for $15.2 million, 3.1% above the property's last valuation. The Auckland-based property investor has entered into an unconditional contract to sell the building to an unidentified buyer for about $450,000 more than the building's $4.7 million valuation on March the 31st. Settlement is scheduled for September 30 and would take DNZ's agreed sales to $46.7 million. The property investor plans to sell $80 million of property, which it will use to help fund its $155 million Northwest Shopping Centre development. Separately, DNZ said it settled the $17 million acquisition of Heartland House in Auckland's Newmarket. DNZ shares increased 0.3% to 204 and have gained 6.5% this year. To the primary sector, New Zealand's largest primary sector businesses are on a boot camp in the US to work on ways to add value to the country's primary goods exports. The group of 50 includes meat companies, Silver Fern Farms and Alliance Group, seafood group Sanford and Sealord, and milk processors Fonterra Cooperative Group and Miraka and their chief executives, as well as representatives from government agencies covering primary industries, trade and enterprise and free trade negotiations. They're at Stanford University in Silicon Valley, California, planning how to boost New Zealand primary exports, which account for almost 3/4 of the country's merchandise trade. The government wants companies to add more value to commodities to help reach its target of doubling primary exports to $64 billion by 2025. Agricultural producers are optimistic that targeting higher value niche markets and increasing the value of goods rather than the volume will better insulate them from fickle commodity price swings. New Zealand Merino Chief Executive John Brackenridge says, "We feel the discussion should move from being a price-taking country into one where we become much more market-shaping." The company helped set up the annual boot camps in 2012. He said, "It's a matter of understanding about what you need to do to shift. Instead of us as individual businesses going and doing our bit in market, we're looking for areas of collaboration and understanding and sharing of insights." The get-togethers led to the setting up of a marketing hub for New Zealand primary producers in the horticulture, seafood and farming sectors in Shanghai in April. Mr Brackenridge says New Zealand's small size means its companies are well placed to work together. He said, "We can just get on the phone and ask, how do you feel about collaboration?" He says, "We've got a huge opportunity to lead the world in this. It enables us to be far more strategic in how we're approaching these global markets." KPMG's global head of agribusiness, Ian Proudfoot, who has attended the boot camp, says in his annual agribusiness agenda report, New Zealand primary sector business needs to focus on achieving premium prices for products by taking greater control through the supply chain and getting closer to consumers. New Zealand Merino's Mr Brackenridge says Silicon Valley's ecosystem, involving a mix of universities, business and venture capitalists, will help New Zealand companies understand how they can better work together. Speakers at this year's event include sustainability specialist and architect William McDonough, Stanford professors and business executives from local companies such as Google, as well as from startups.
NBR Radio. Free to air online with business news you can use.
People News. Jason Paris officially became Spark's Chief Executive for Home, Mobile and Business, or HMB, today, effectively the number 2 job at the company. His appointment was flagged way back in January when the incumbent Chris Quinn announced his intention to depart. He's off to become Foodstuff's Chief Executive, a role he'll pick up from September. Perhaps curiously, given the 6-month stretch since, Spark has yet to decide who will fill Mr Paris's previous role. A Spark spokeswoman told NBR Radio this morning no one is confirmed yet. Mr Paris, who came to Spark via top roles at TVNZ and MediaWorks, has been with the company for 4 years, most recently as General Manager for HMB. His key project in that role was the brand transition from Telecom to Spark. Charity news. Local real estate giant Bailey's has become the first platinum sponsor for Make-A-Wish New Zealand. The company has announced the elite sponsorship as the charity gets ready to grant its 2,000th wish this month. Bailey's already supports more than 300 charities, generating more than $1.5 million per annum for not-for-profit organisations. Make-A-Wish New Zealand will now become the firm's principal charity in what it hopes will be a long-term partnership, generating hope, strength and joy in the lives of many more children. Make-A-Wish New Zealand grants the wishes to children aged between 3 and 17 who are suffering from life-threatening conditions. Approximately 60% of children involved with Make-A-Wish New Zealand have some form of aggressive cancer, and the remaining 40% suffer from a variety of rare and debilitating conditions. Money raised from sponsorship and donations goes towards paying for the wishes, which are limited only by the child's imagination. With its current funding framework, Make-A-Wish New Zealand is able to grant 200 wishes per year, although about 400 children are diagnosed with a life-threatening medical condition each year. Bailey's Managing Director Mike Bailey says with a national network of 79 offices and 1,578 personnel, the company's in a strong position to support Make-A-Wish through both fundraising and awareness-raising activities organised at a branch level.
NBR Radio. With Clooney Restaurant now offering Auckland's most exclusive private dining room. NBR Radio.